First of all, I would like to acknowledge that I am on Whadjuk Noongar Boodja and pay my deepest respects to the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on and the lands that you are all on, and pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people everywhere that you are. I'd also like to acknowledge all of the fantastic partners that we have for today's webinar. And those partners are IPWIA, and acknowledging the President, WA President Luke McGurk. We have Stormwater WA, acknowledging Martin Glover as the President of Stormwater WA. The New Waterways Board, and they are, the chair of that board is Craig Wansborough, the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects, and the President Giles Pickard, and the Parks and Leisure Association and the President Janine Ahola there. So welcome and thank you to all of those fantastic organisations for your support in getting the word out that we are delivering this talk today. So our fantastic speakers, we have Martin Glover, who is the Director of Infrastructure at the City of Gosnells, and Martin brings over 40 years of experience in public works engineering. His career spans civil engineering, asset management and waste services following his start as a trainee surveyor in 1976. And he has had a long tenure in local government and he's an absolute legend. Widely recognised for his leadership in sustainable asset and environmental initiatives, including innovations in road construction, traffic management, water conservation, street lighting and resource recovery. Key achievements include the Premier's Water Conservation Award for Mosman Park Water Cycle Project. And if you don't know about that project, it was done quite a long time ago. I urge you to go and have a read about it. It's actually pretty cool. Also, what he didn't put in his own bio is last year, Martin was recognised as one of our 2 WA Waterways Champions of the Year. And welcome also to our other champion, Becky from Stirling. And now we're also going to introduce Jacqueline Bolston, and she has been an applied climate and environmental scientist for the past 25 years, during which time she has researched the impacts of climate variability, climate change and environmental degradation on agriculture, natural assets, ecosystems, emergency management and the built environment across Australia. She currently works as a Director of Sustainability for the Institute of Public Works Engineering Australasia, as a member of the South Australian Government Climate Science Advisory Committee, which is amazing, and as a private consultant to local, state and federal governments and other organisations nationally. I would like to welcome both Martin and Jacqueline, and here is our presentation today. Go, Martin.
So, yeah, I'll just start because my part of this presentation is really short. Really just good morning to everybody in WA and South Australia, and good afternoon to everybody in the eastern states, and for anyone who's overseas who may have come in for this webinar, whatever time of day it is, welcome to this presentation. My name's Martin Glover. I've been involved with IPWIA now for decades, many decades, and it gives me the greatest of pleasure to have the Green Infrastructure Management Manual now available. The Institute has been a leader in asset management across the world, and this really does complete the suite of resources that are available for asset managers, and especially those of us who've been questioning why we haven't dealt with green asset for such a long time, that we now have something that we can hang our hat on, which is fantastic. So without further ado, I am going to pass over to Dr. Jacqueline Bolston, who was responsible for putting this document together. And I'm going to sit back then and listen to her presentation, and I'll come back on when we have some questions. So over to you, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Martin. And thank you to the Western Australian group and everyone who's been involved in inviting me over today. Shelley, are you going to be sharing the slides for us? Or?
I can do that if you would like.
Yep.
Is that easiest for you? Okay,
yeah,
fantastic.
I think so. I'm just aware of technical difficulties at my end, and I don't want it to seize up on us while we're halfway through or something.
No worries. So, you can see that?
Not yet. I can't see it. I'm sure hopefully it's coming soon.
Martin, can you see it now?
Yes, I can see it now. Thank you.
Awesome. Fantastic.
Right. So perhaps if we I'll just say change. Shelley, perhaps you can change the next slide. So the Green Infrastructure Management Manual developed by IPWEA. Change. Next slide. Yeah, so many of you are going to be familiar with IPWEA. We are the peak association for public works professionals and asset managers, established in Australia in 1905. And we currently have an online community of over 37,000 asset stewards. For those who'd like to know more about us and the internationally recognised resources that we provide, please feel free to go to our website. Next slide, please. So our key resources are the International Infrastructure Management Manual, the Australian Infrastructure Financial Management Manual, the NAMS Plus Asset Management Resources, and the AusSpec National Specification Systems that are used around Australia. We have over 20 practice notes as printed and ebooks, and a whole range of educational pathways, including those for elected members, which is very popular at the moment. Next slide, please. So the Green Infrastructure Management Manual, as many of you know, asset management has been in place for over a century, and so it's a well-developed field with a global common language. The approach provides a well-established, structured, long-term framework for integrating nature into our urban environments. And the Green Infrastructure Management Manual has been developed by IPWEA in collaboration with a range of project partners and funding from the Local Government Association Research and Development Scheme. So it enables the integration of green infrastructure into asset management planning. It provides a detailed glossary and definitions to build a common language. It identifies 24 green infrastructure asset classes for the land, the water, and the coast. And it identifies a range of green infrastructure services and benefits and methodologies for valuing those assets. It also details green infrastructure costs, risks, and financial reporting requirements, and uses a lifecycle management approach that you're probably all familiar with already. And then finally, it gives us a simple framework and instructions for writing a green infrastructure asset management plan. So we know that from work that's been undertaken in Canada, that by including green infrastructure as part of our overall asset management strategy, we can save capital and operating costs and reduce risk as well when compared to using just grey engineering resources alone. So by applying the principles and practices of asset management to green infrastructure, we can ensure that our nature-based assets are valued and managed to provide optimal services, and they do not become degraded, just as we would with any other grey infrastructure asset. Next slide. So how do we define green infrastructure? So green infrastructure can be defined as a managed and interconnected nature-based network for the provision of services. We are focusing here on those assets that are nature-based or living and intentionally managed to provide a level of service that's required. So when we think about the different assets, we group them into these different groups. The naturally established natural assets, such as a managed remnant vegetation. Green infrastructure assets that have been planted, modified or restored, such as a park and a garden. And then finally, hybrid or enhanced assets, such as green roofs and walls, or street trees and tree pits. So the important difference between naturally established natural assets and the other groups is that it's important to know that when we're managing the financial aspects of asset management, there's a distinction between whether the asset has been planted or invested in at the beginning, or whether it was naturally established. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slides. So next slide, please. So the green infrastructure assets that are included in the manual are then introduced in the book, and the ecosystem services that they provide are summarised for the land, the water, and the coast. So ecosystem services include those examples that are shown there on the diagram. They're things such as slope stabilization, cooling, a reduction in the urban heat island effect, shading, air and water quality improvement, sediment capture, enhanced water infiltration and retention, reduced surface runoff and flooding, storm and coast protection, erosion control and dune stabilization. So a wealth of services that green infrastructure can be providing for us. There's also a huge range of co-benefits, and these are often the ones that we hear about that might not be so easy to value in the past. But they include things such as reductions in energy consumption in buildings, the storing of carbon, climate resilience, protection of wildlife habitats, improved pollination, improvements in human health and well-being, enhanced visual amenity, reductions in crime, traffic calming, and many, many more. So details on each of those 24 green infrastructure asset classes are included in the manual, and they are provided in an extensive 100-page appendix. Next slide. So we next, in the Green Infrastructure Management Manual, we can call it the GIM. Some people call it the e-book, the GIM-E, the GIME. So in the GIME, we then provide an overview of the asset management process and provide detailed instructions on how you can apply that to green infrastructure. The first step is providing a level of service. So for example, if we need shade and cooling, we can identify which green infrastructure assets could provide that service, perhaps the trees, and then include them in our asset register so that we can then monitor them and determine their condition and ensure that they're providing that defined level of shade and cooling that we want. The second element to asset management planning is to manage future changes in service demand. So for example, will there be a need for more shade and cooling in the future? And how might that demand be met? Will we invest in an enhanced urban forest, for example? Element 3 of asset management planning is taking a life cycle approach. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. It has those dimensions of acquisition, operation, maintenance, renewal, and recycling and disposal, as we can see in the little flow chart there. So from a green infrastructure perspective, that might mean managing, designing, acquiring, operating, and maintaining our urban forest. Element 4 is about managing risk. Obviously, that's an important aspect. So identifying, assessing, and managing the risks might include the risks from climate change on our urban forest, or the risks associated with our green infrastructure, such as falling limbs or roots. And then finally, it's critical that we have a long-term financial plan that embodies all the actions that are included in our asset management planning system. So the required expenditure and how our green infrastructure asset management plan will be funded would be included in our long-term financial planning. Next slide. So if we can go to the next slide then, great. So the GIMM then provides detailed guidance on how we integrate green infrastructure into our asset management planning, including asset management policies, our strategic plans, asset management plans, and operational plans. So for each of those steps, it provides clear instructions, some examples, case studies from around Australia and internationally, examples of tools that can be used to aid you in that process, and embedded links to further documents and examples and other websites. So lots of great supporting information there to help you embed green infrastructure into your asset management planning processes. Next slide. So the main body of the GIM then provides you with a simple framework and detailed instructions on how to write a green infrastructure asset management plan. So the asset management plan is what brings together all the necessary elements. It talks to organizational support, asset knowledge, life cycle planning, financial planning into a single cohesive document that will guide our green infrastructure management over the long term. The steps in the framework are shown there on the left, and they are corporate planning, knowing your assets, planning the life cycle, and securing long-term funding. So let's have a look at each of those steps in a little more detail. Next slide. So writing an asset management plan. The first step to writing a green infrastructure asset management plan is going to be corporate planning, because it's the people that are going to make this happen. We need to include green infrastructure into an asset management plan by including a range of stakeholders, from our elected members and organisational management to our asset managers, our engineers, biologists, arborists, ecologists, financial staff, and for local government that might include members of the public as well. So there's a wide range of stakeholders that need to come together to make this happen. And so probably the most important first step is to come to a common language, to make sure that everybody understands what the common goal is. Does your asset manager know what a green infrastructure bioswale is, for example, or does he get it confused with a rain garden? We need to understand those dimensions of green infrastructure. And does your arborist understand what an asset lifecycle planning process is? So the Green Infrastructure Management Manual provides an overview of all of those dimensions and can be shared across all your stakeholders to make sure that everybody understands the different dimensions that we're talking about. So as part of corporate planning and engaging our stakeholders, we need to gain leadership and stakeholder commitment to include green infrastructure into our asset management plan. As part of that, we're going to confirm what our goals are, our strategies, policies and plans, and determine what level of maturity and detail we want with our green infrastructure asset management plan. And that might be starting off very small. Start with one green infrastructure asset class, perhaps it's street trees, and then move on from there to expand into other areas. We need to define the implementation roles and responsibilities so people know who they are, what they need to be doing, and then provide training. And so without these steps, the inclusion of green infrastructure is not going to work. It'll stall. So this chapter is provided, supported again with an appendix that provides further detail on how you can enable organisational change, including what the drivers for change are, and communication strategies and templates for stakeholder engagement. And oftentimes that's been a stumbling block in the past. So that information is there for those who are really keen to get this off the ground and need some guidance on how to engage stakeholders and communicate with them. Next slide. So writing an asset management plan needs, first off, to know what the assets are. So our first step is to identify the assets, record them in our asset register. Step number one. We then want to define the technical and community levels of service and align these with organisational objectives and regulatory requirements. And regularly assess asset performance against the defined levels of service and have KPIs for that. So knowing our assets is underpinned by an extensive 100-page appendix that details each of the green infrastructure asset classes for the land, water and the coast. It includes photographs, design drawings, summary tables that show relative measures of benefit, cost, risk and other metrics. It has a range of case studies linked to it, and of course tools and links to other resources, including specific asset management manuals for a range of different asset classes that have already been developed either here in Australia or overseas. The next step is planning the life cycle. So if we go to the next slide. We need to plan the life cycle and manage the entire asset lifespan. So of course, green infrastructure, I came from a biology background. We used to call them plants. Engineers call them green infrastructure, whatever, doesn't matter. They either have a life cycle or a lifespan. It's the same thing. It's the time between when you implement or install your asset until when it's decommissioned or recycled or dies. So we need to provide guidance and this is included in the Green Infrastructure Management Plan, on how we're going to forecast demand for the services by anticipating any future changes such as urban expansion, resource demand and climate change. We then provide advice on how to develop your life cycle management strategy for acquisition, operation, maintenance, renewal and disposal and recycling, and then how to plan scenarios and manage risks associated with green infrastructure. And this chapter is supported by examples on monitoring processes, more case studies, and links to tools such as the CSIRO Climate Change Analog Map, which provides you with a spatial reference on how climate is likely to change in the future and where you might look to find green infrastructure assets, plants that do well in a climate now that you might expect in another 20 or 40 years. And then securing the future. Next slide. The third step in writing our asset management plan. This is about ensuring that our long-term funding and sustainability is there for our assets. So this manual provides guidance on how to quantify your asset value and the whole of life cycle cost forecasts, including alignment with the International Accounting Standard, depreciation of green infrastructure assets, and a summary table of financial reporting requirements and allowable values. We need to integrate green infrastructure into our long-term financial planning, including sources of funding, green infrastructure for CapEx and OpEx projects, and we provide a whole range of options on how you might find that information, and breakout boxes on what the carbon market is, offsets and credits, because that's something that people are quite often interested in when they're investing in green infrastructure. This chapter is supported by an appendix with detailed instructions on how to determine ecosystem service values and links to existing tools, and then another one that provides a detailed asset maturity table, and a third that details the process for investing in new green infrastructure assets, including a summary of biodiversity sensitive urban design, identification of service requirements and appropriate assets, identifying optimal locations for your assets within the landscape, and decision and option analysis, such as a return on investment and benefit cost analysis when you're trying to build your business case. Okay, so next slide, please. So this Green Infrastructure Management Manual, as I said, is supported by a whole range of resources. We wanted to make it as dynamic and engaging as possible. There are detailed appendices for all of those 24 green infrastructure assets with the descriptions, diagrams, ecosystem service levels, co-benefits, valuations, risks, costs, and performance measures. And you can see some examples there on the slide of how the information is provided in a diverse range of ways for people. We're also developing, or we have now already developed, our standalone online training module, which is now available through the IPWEA website. If you go to the homepage for green infrastructure on the IPWEA website, you'll find a link there to our standalone training module. And that can be undertaken as a self-paced process, and at the completion of it, you will receive an industry recognised micro-credential to show that you've done some training in green infrastructure asset management. The GIMM aligns with all the relevant ISO standards on asset management, risk management, financial reporting, and the International Infrastructure Management Manual that we already have, and any other current and emerging policies of relevance. In fact, there has been some updates already in this space since we wrote it. And so the e-book version, which is also free on our website, will be incorporating those changes in the next month or so. So if you've received already or downloaded your PDF copy, that's fantastic, but be aware that it will be updated in the ebook version going forward. So next slide then. Just a shout out to all of our partners in developing this. It's been a huge project. It wouldn't have been possible without the support and collaboration of all the partners there, and funding from the Local Government Association of South Australia Research and Development Fund. So a big thank you to everybody who provided input. Some of you may have been reviewers for this and co-developed it. And certainly the input that we've had and the range of stakeholders, I think, has created a guidance that is diverse, speaks to a whole range of stakeholders, answers everybody's questions, hopefully, but is also easy to access, particularly in the ebook version where you can link straight into the sections that you're interested in. So last slide, I think. There you go. You can download a free copy now using the QR code or go into the Green Infrastructure page on the IPWEA website. And as I said, there's also the link there to the online training module, which does have a small fee associated with it, just so that we can maintain the site. But the manual itself is free of charge for everybody.